Hey guys, I decided to make this video about recording timers from logs and setting up the configuration of my WeakAura and just how I prep for any given boss. As seen a lot of questions or comments throughout the Wago page or YouTube comments, and I wanted to do a video directly on it as it's easier than just pasting them in a comment and letting you guys just run wild with it. So, a few disclaimers on this. We don't really set up healing cooldowns in our guild for bosses, which might be blasphemy, but generally we play with a lot of good healers on our team that I have faith in, and we all will set up our healing assignments on our own with generally the best output in mind. And then as we go through a boss, if certain moments feel like we have no healing going on and the HP bars are really low, we'll discuss it essentially pull to pull, and maybe someone will move something around. So the timers you'll see here are going to generally be based off of logs, which are using their healing buttons for discs at certain points, but obviously it might depend on if your person setting up your healing assignments for your guild wants you to push your buttons in different orders. You might need to adjust it slightly. We're going to assume that we get to create our own timings, which honestly will probably line up with where they should be anyway, as that's the moments of the fight that disc has brought. So the first step that I do is I open up the Wowutils.com website. This is, if you were familiar with previously Serio and his healing spreadsheet that he used to share on Google Sheets, this is the new version that they've since ported over to a web application. So it's on Wowutils.com. I won't go through necessarily how to configure this website, as they have plenty of documentation. They've got support in their Discord channel. I'll leave it up to that if you're not familiar with it. But this is a pretty core component if you're doing Mythic raiding, to planning generally anything. You might be planning cooldowns for the raid as far as personals. There's actually assignment pages in here where you can do the different assignments for like WeakAuras, like soaking and things like that. So you should be familiar with this. If not, though, again, I won't go through it in detail. This is sort of something I'll link maybe below for the Discord channel. But yeah, so the first steps will be to set up whatever boss you're going to be on. And primarily what I want to look at is this site lists all of the spells in a timeline, and it should be when these things are actually dealing damage. But of course, there's some variability as far as boss to boss. Sometimes they have phases that your guild might push differently than a different guild. Now, luckily on Gallywix, there's only one instance of that, and the rest of the fight is exactly statically timed. Nothing's going to ever change. But the breaking the shield at the start of the fight, where he's spinning in a circle with the lasers, you could break that shield sooner or later than the log you're looking at, and that will drastically change when the damage is happening. So first and foremost, I want to line up this timeline with the log that I've picked. Okay, so for instance, I've picked a particular log here. I really just kind of picked one at random, but you really want to look at logs that match the strategy you might be doing, because if this log is older, the meta might have changed. As we get more gear, we get more of the raid buffs from the rep. You might start to do bosses differently than they did 4 weeks ago. So make sure the log is current, or at least the fight time looks like something that you're going to end up with based on your guild and the strategy you're doing. On Gallywix, this is a little less difficult, as there's pretty still just one strategy. If you kill them sooner than later, it doesn't change where your ramps are. But think of something like One-Armed Bandit, as that has a variety of strategies that guilds have been using over the weeks. As we get more damage, you're skipping phases, you're doing the things out of order. So make sure that when you look at a fight time and it ends, at 9 minutes or whatever, that's probably not what we're doing today. Make sure your logs match up with, again, the expected output and meta strategy you're using. So I picked this one here, and let's try to align this intermission sort of ending with what's happening based on this guild. So it looks like they get their first ego check at 41 seconds. So let's kind of zoom in. And so I've already pre-adjusted this, but you want to line this bar up. Like, I think the default might be like 30 seconds or something. And obviously this ego check and the start of the phase is not in alignment, so you're just going to have a hard time transcribing this log. So slide this phase bar, until it lines up, so that generally the spells are being cast about the same time. 102, 117, more or less good enough, and we're good to go. So save those changes, and then let's start transcribing. Okay, now that we have our log and our timeline synced up, we can start to look at the actual casts from the priest. And things we're going to look at are, where are they casting their evangelism ramps? Number one. Number two, where are the miscellaneous powered radiances going in between? And then additional things like premonition of solace casts, and where they choose to insert ultimate penitence ramps, as you'll get 2 of those typically in a fight to disperse kind of where you want. Those are the most, I think, free-flowing cooldown you might have. So starting off with evangelism, and on this fight, it's particularly interesting as typically when you're casting your evangelism ramp, what I will look at is, where are they casting Dark Reprimand? Like, where is their payout happening? And assuming a moment where you don't have PI and you are not under Bloodlust, a full ramp from the first global to casting your first Dark Reprimand is 20 seconds. That's about the time it takes to ramp from the very first global to when you're actually doing healing. Now, as soon as you introduce Power Infusion into the mix, that takes off about 4 seconds of time. So you can start your ramp a little bit later if you know you're going to have Power Infusion at that moment. And then if you combine that with Bloodlust, obviously this ramp sequence is even shorter. And so you have to kind of adjust on some of these logs, as it's tricky, first of all, to know, okay, where is this person ramping, right? Obviously, he's going to do it pre-pull because he only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 atonements out before he goes into Powered Radiance. So he probably ramps maybe at 5 seconds pre-pull on this particular log. For Gallywix, personally, I think I ramp at about 3 seconds. It's not a big deal. Mostly this is just a lot of pad, to be honest, at the beginning of the fight. The intro sort of intermission, quote unquote, doesn't last very long. And typically by the time I've cast all 4 of these Dark Reprimands, when I start my ramp at about 4 seconds, typically the boss is done doing the intermission. So I think it kind of works out. You can really, on this particular fight, do it a variety of timings, and I think they will all be effective. It's not a part of the fight you're going to wipe too likely, so I wouldn't get too concerned over this necessarily. But for consistency's sake of just kind of, I know that it works, I'm going to put start ramp here at 3 seconds. Okay, we'll come back to this later. Then, like I said, the next thing we're going to look at is Power Word Radiance, and where are these extra casts that these players are casting? Where's like the window that they're being thrown out? Because you get about 3 or 4 in between each ramp, and where they're chosen to be spent definitely varies. So I wouldn't get too tied up on like always casting it exactly where they do. As for instance, right here, this isn't going to heal anybody. No one's taking any damage right here, but it's more like, okay, well, it's either that or I don't cast it. So let's just go with the log and put one down at 24 seconds. Should be after the shield is done. Maybe it tops somebody off. That's fine. Okay, and then we'll keep scrolling. And then we see some other things here that I was talking about. So here's more Powered Radiances and a Premonition of Solace. So sticking with what this person's using, let's put one at about 55 seconds, because you have to include, of course, the cast time. There. And then we have Solace. So this one's interesting in that you get to, there's a large window where you can cast this, and it's going to be kind of up to you what you feel like you want to cover. Just note that you really do want to cast Solace in between ramps. It removes an extra global you don't have to do on your even numbered evangelism ramps, because normally you would do Piety and Insight on your odd number ramps. And if you just were lazy, you would do Solace and Clairvoyance on your even numbered ramps. But if you can remove an extra global, that's good. It just, cuts down on the time to ramp. As well as if you have Solace running and then you push Clairvoyance, you get another Solace charge but they can go on the same person and then actually overwrites each other and you sort of lose it. So I definitely find that if you use Premonition of Solace on a moment that's in between, that's definitely for the better. So let's put it down at 57 seconds. We'll just have a note that says Solace. That will remind us to cast it there. So it looks like they have another radiance at about 60 seconds. So let's mark it down. And then this kind of gets into, I also like to see what is their intent. So in this case, they're casting 2 radiances at about 56 seconds and about a minute in. And if we kind of zoom in on this, what they're trying to heal is this healing absorb. So this is maybe where I would move these back a little to make sure I'm catching the healing absorb and not just casting them just for their applications of atonements. So I really like to look at the intent and figure out, hey, did they just cast it early? Maybe they wanted to move it back. And this is where you get to set timers using the knowledge of, well, here's where the actual damage event is. So maybe I move this back a couple seconds and catch both the healing absorb and the damage that happens in the moment. So a little bit of refinement there. You know, it's not a huge gain, but that's something you could think about. Let's keep going. Here's now our first ultimate penitence. So later on when we get to my WeakAura, I assume that most folks will run Overloaded with Light talent. That's the one that gives you 10 extra atonements. I don't know that this is always true, but I typically run it, and most logs that I see generally do. So I'm going to assume that you only need 1 radiance charge, and this is kind of the way we're going to go going forward. So let's add Ultimate Penitence to the timeline. So this takes about 9 seconds of pre-ramp. And so you want to look at, okay, he cast this at a minute 31. What was he trying to cover? He's healing absorb. So that's actually a pretty perfect timing, given that if this is the damage event, he has it casting 1 second after. He absolutely nailed it. So the intent there is great. So let's subtract 9 seconds from that. Is a minute 22. We'll put it here. We'll say up. So we can even walk it back and look at all the atonement casts, but it will line up about the same, and you'll have a good timer there. All right, so then we've gone through the major moments of the timeline that we're going to be recording, and so we can just going down the timeline, keep going through the rest of the fight, and let's just finish off all the notes. So at this point, we are now going back into the next ramp. This looks like it ends at about 203, 204. So we'll look at the timeline itself and see what's happening at about 2 minutes and 4 seconds. Looks like he actually times it pretty well, so let's stick with that. Now, again, at this point of the fight, you might get PI. It doesn't look like that is the case on this particular pull. Looks like he cast it after. So you can start at about 204 and go back about 20 seconds. That should line up about where he starts ramping, which is pretty close. So let's just put this at about, we're going to go 203. We'll do 143, say start ramp. Okay, so that's going to cover that moment. Note again, we're only casting Clairvoyance here. We don't have Solace. We cast that earlier down the road. A bunch of filler spells, which we'll get into a bit once we watch the video. And here are 2 more Radiances. So this is likely during the soaks with the very fast gates that you have to take. Let's make sure that's correct. We'll reset the timeline here. We're at 240. Looks like it's, yep, there's another soak. So here he chooses to use both his radiance charges. I actually do the exact same thing. I kind of like this. And this is a unique scenario where you're not necessarily ramping. It's kind of the atonements you can get out. This is a sort of hectic part of the fight. You are moving and dodging, trying to bait a beam, and it's a lot of cognitive overload. I do myself have a ramp timer that's kind of just an open-ended, hey, get out as many atonements as you can while you run up to do your circle soaks. So for instance, if this looks like where he starts doing it, I might have put a timer here on 26 seconds, 226, that just kind of says ramp. And this is just a kind of a free flow one. And nothing's going to pop up on my screen as far as the ramp helper that we'll show later, but it's more just a reminder to me just to cast atonements, do what I can while dodging blaze lines, dodging the little bombs on the ground, waiting for the beam, running after the beam is cast into your position to soak. And once you're there, you will cast these 2 radiances. We'll put at about 240, which is about where this soak happens. I usually just write something like 2 radiance, or this could obviously say whatever you want. Okay, so we come out of that, we get another radiance cast here at about 307. Let's just stay consistent and add it down on the sheet. Looks like it's again right after a healing absorb. We'll add a single radiance there. So zoom out here. And again, looking at the intent, making sure that the intent was to heal off healing absorbs. Looks like he's timing it very well. So again, let's just stick with the timers because he seems like he's pretty much on point. And that works into the last ramp of phase 1, which is going to pay out at about 346. You won't have PI or Lust here. So again, if it's 346 is when he's paying out. Let's double check. That's again, this guy's actually really on the ball here. So this is where you want your payout. You go back 20 seconds to 326. They start ramp. And we've mapped out phase 1. So that's kind of how it'll work. This, you can just keep going throughout the fight. I won't necessarily go through the rest of the fight as this just loops over and over again. Just find where the radiances go. Just find where the solaces go. Figure out where the payouts are for your evangelism ramps. Walk it back 20 seconds. Repeat this until you've got all of the spells. All right, so now that we've finished phase 1, we have everything entered in on our timeline as far as the phase. We can go here and copy our notes to the clipboard. And before we paste this in game, we have to do a little bit of formatting so that the note is in the right format, that the WeakAura I've written will pick up the right events and pop up the right notifications ahead of time. So this is where I use a little bit of GPT magic, mostly because I'm lazy and I don't want to cut and paste things over and over again. So I will paste the note here for phase 1 into the prompt. And I'll ask it to do a couple of things. A couple of these are just things I like, as I don't necessarily always want my text-to-speech on my MRT reminders to say things like power radiance. I just wanted to say radiance. So for instance, I might say in this chat prompt, replace this with, and I'll say something I want, which is I just wanted to say radiance. So that's like one thing I'll have. Sometimes if you do solace and you just click on like premonition here as a shorthand without typing in solace, I'll also replace that because I don't want it to say premonition. I want my text to speech to say solace. So if you end up doing that on a timeline, you can replace that. A lot of these are personal preference. This is not important to anything that we're going to go through with the WeakAura. I just kind of like my text to speech to be shorter rather than saying out like all of these long spell names. But now that we've done that, I also want to set up the formatting for my WeakAura, which is anytime that we've typed start ramp. Actually, I think that's correct. Yes. So anywhere I put text start ramp, I want to add on WA full the end of the time block. Also do this with up and use comma WA colon up. Let's see what happens. Looks like mostly did it. Looks actually pretty correct. Cool. So this is a step you don't have to do. If you want to copy and paste this little syntax right here, which is again described in the description page of my WeakAura on wego.io, you can do that manually. Again, I'm just lazy and I might do 3 or 4 bosses in a row, so I can just copy and paste my MRT notes one, paste at a time, and get a note, paste the next one, get a note. I really don't want to sit here and copy and paste and insert these all over the place and change all this stuff. So it's just a little bit of laziness. If you're fine doing it by hand, that's okay. Just really what you want to do is look at wherever you said start ramp, and you need to add this syntax right here at the very end. So you see how it's always at the end of this block of code. It needs to say comma, WA for WeakAura, colon, and then one of the event names that's in my WeakAura. So either full or up. That will either do a full ramp or the ultimate penitence ramps. There's additional ones like you can do double, which is just 20 atonements, but no pets, no evangelism. I also have mini, which is about 6 to 7, I think. Maybe actually might be closer to 7 or 8 atonements, just like a slight going wide if you want. Those are other ones. I don't usually use those at all. I think this is really the only two I use are Ultimate Penitence or a full ramp with all of the cooldowns. But this is it. Now you've got a note, and you can copy this and paste it into MRT in the game, use it as your personal note for whatever boss, label it accordingly, and pull it up whenever you're going to be starting that encounter. Okay, so then I'm going to show the note and what it looks like in the fight, and we'll actually probably just walk through a little bit of Gallywix to see some of these timers in action. Again, I'm not using these exact notes. I, of course, use the notes I used when we kill this on a reclear, but let's just walk through it. So, like I said, I put my timer to start at about 3 seconds, and so because it is an 8-second pre-warning, this is essentially Kaze's reminders. I've just repurposed it to be a bar instead of text. You might just have a simple text thing that says, ramp in 3 seconds. So if there's any confusion here, this is just a visual change. It's the same Kaze code. I've just turned it into a countdown bar instead of just pure text. But as this thing has an 8-second pre-warning, and this is essentially, hey, go in 3 seconds, sometimes your bars will look like this, or your reminder will look like this. It'll just be a 3-second countdown. On pull, it can't say 8 seconds, right? It can't warn you ahead of time because the fight hasn't started. So this one will be fast, but I usually just cast 1 Shadow Word Pain, 1 Penance, and then I'm good to go. I actually think I might even interrupt it a little bit early in this one. I do not. Okay. So as soon as this then timer fires off and gets to 0, the WeakAura shows up. One thing to note, you have to have this note visible as far as it cannot be hidden. You can shrink this down, and often I do, to like a very, very short window because I just don't want to see it on my screen. But it has to be like, you have to click enable in the options. It cannot be hidden. Otherwise, these events do not fire and this doesn't work. Okay. So what'll happen is you will see a list of spells. If you guys have ever seen like Hakili before, it's a very similar looking add-on or a similar looking flow, just that it's not dynamic to a degree. Like, it's not going to start just replacing spells randomly. It's pretty static, as your ramp should be the same spells every time. A couple things I try to incorporate into the logic. As of writing right now, it's a lot of this is there. I am making improvements in the future. So if you're watching this later, some of these things might be even furtherly enhanced. But for instance, if you don't have Power Word Shield available, like you just cast it and then your ramp starts, I currently am going to replace it with just a regular renew to keep the same amount of atonements. I have kind of toyed around with maybe the fact that since you've already cast Power Word Shield, you have the atonement out there. This global is kind of covered, maybe putting some kind of like a slight delay on it. Those are future things I'm thinking about. But right now, it just will replace this with an additional renew just to keep the timing the same. Technically, you would have 1 extra atonement than you need, but that's just kind of how I have the WeakAura at the moment. So as you cast the spells, though, it will start to slide through the sequence. We can actually even kind of slow it down. And then you get towards the end of your first set of renews. You'll have a flash heal. You'll have a shield. And then now you have kind of the final bits. For this particular fight, I do start my ramp outside of the group. I know a lot of everybody else is in their little teams on their pie slices. As disc, you could basically stand outside of these beams to get your ramp, wait for 2 of the beams to pass, and then kind of jump in. You'll see that in a second. It's perfectly safe. I never once felt like I was going to die. This will just help you do your ramp and not have to like spin in a circle while you're doing it. So get your Radiance off, get your Pet off for the same global, get your second Radiance off, your Evangelism the same global, into Mind Blast, and then whatever premonitions you need, and then you're going. And I like to just follow in behind this beam and just finish out the Dark Reprimand. So this is kind of what I was talking about in this fight, where the intermission ends so fast that, like, yes, it's probably better to have your ramp maybe like a little bit sooner, but at the same time, I'm casting Dark Reprimands into damage and the shield still exists. So this is a pretty good timer. As soon as like maybe we get more raid buffs in the coming weeks, maybe depending on you're watching this, you would want to maybe move your stuff around. Okay, so let's keep going into the fight. Here's a single Radiance that we marked earlier. So I don't think I cast it here anymore. I think I've moved this around. But let's skip ahead to where I end up using the first Ultimate Penitence. Okay, so it's coming up here, 8 seconds and counting. And again, you just want to go through the spells. So this is a 9-second process between all of the globals. So I had my first shield. We'll have 2 more renews for 3. Flash Shield's 4, 5, Radiance is 10. The Ultimate Penitence is then adding 10 more for 20 total atonements. So it kind of looks like this. On this particular fight, there is a quirk where these folks out here, Overloaded with Light has a pretty short range. So unfortunately, I just missed somebody who was doing one of the final soaks. Just a random side note, but it is what it is. And again, now we get right into our second ramp, which is immediately after. So here's my timer counting down. When it gets to 0, the WeakAura is going to pop up. Boom, right into the next ramp. I do also include which premonition you have right here. Sometimes it'll say something into something, just to kind of help you know which ones you have available. Without having to look, you'll just kind of have an icon here. We go through Radiance into Pet, Radiance into Evangelism, Mind Blast into Premonition, wait for the damage, then go. Spend all of your Dark Reprimands. And that's kind of it. There isn't much more going on as far as the WeakAura in its complexity, but as long as these timers work out, it will show up every single time where it needs to. If you follow through the globals, you will time it exactly where you need to. Of course, if you start to get mechanics and you have to move a little bit, I try to then revert to like dodging the mechanics, but still staring at this and trying to hit the globals as I'm moving. Fights can get chaotic, but as long as you're trying to keep still putting out the atonements as best you can, it'll still time pretty close to where you wanted to, right? It won't be a total disaster, and you completely forget where you're at, and you cast things out of sequence, and then your ramp is, completely messed up. This should help try to isolate those moments to be fewer and fewer until you get more and more comfortable doing the whole sequence and always hitting it on time. And then I've also added some options in here for a couple extra features. Nothing too exotic, but there are some things just to note. So there is an option here to send off an Innervate Whisper whenever that full ramp event is triggered. This is, at least in my mind, probably where you'll spend the most amount of mana. And so at the point where that event will show up on your screen, we'll also send a whisper to a druid that you can name in here. You can change the text as far as what will actually be whispered to them. Some druids might have a particular WeakAura already, which will flash their screen in some way if you have the right message. So, consult them. I know that the standard, I think, WeakAura to accept usually requires the text "Innervate me," but of course they could have all, customize that or whatever. So you can change this depending on whatever that maybe it is required for that glow to show up on their screen. And you'll toggle this. And every time this happens, it checks to see, it has like a 3-minute timer. It's the cooldown and innervate, so it won't just spam them every time. Generally, then it'll be like your first ramp, somewhere down the road after 3 minutes, and maybe the end of the fight if it's a long fight. You can also customize how many spells show up in the sequence. If you want less slides or more slides, you can toggle that here. Or you can kind of just leave it at the default. And so I just want to say thank you guys for watching this. This WeakAura has been something I've been working on essentially since the start of the tier. So it's relatively new and still in a beta phase. The features you see now, as of this recording, could be expanded upon. I could maybe change the workflow in the future. Really, it's all about just the time I find. I will say that I've been using it since the beginning of this tier, and it's been pretty rock solid. I haven't ran into anything super game breaking as far as bugs or anything at this point. Largely, I'm just working on maybe the overall flow and some of the user experience to it. But for the most part, if you use it today, it should be fully functional and with very little issues that you find in your day-to-day pulls. The description page, like I said, does have a lot of good information as far as some of the inner details, like some of the sequences, what spells are being cast, some of the ideas as far as how you format the note, just to kind of go over some of the things I've already listed. Summary here, showing some of the times that these ramps take. It does have an example video for a Mugsy kill, so if you want to see an actual clip of it on your own, and then some custom option descriptions and things like that. So that's basically it. If you guys have any further questions of how to set up notes or how you go about preparing for a boss, leave those in the comments below, and I'll try to get to them as best I can. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for any future videos I have related to boss kills or updates to the WeakAura. Thank you.